Nu kommer jag och tar dig!
It's not you, it's... How did you know? Oh. Lawrence, what happened last time you said something like that? Exactly. Because everyone's talking about those stupid games. I want to leave my channel uncorrupted. And you think I could actually make a good review? I'm not on YouTube for the views and the money, I make content out of passion. You know, for a creeper you're pretty obsessed with profit. Yeah, just look at where you are now. I've always said that the definition of success is having your soul trapped in a plastic toy and being forced to work for someone you hate. How is that related to this? Well, yes. Either that or killing Scott. Okay, then I'll do it. In case you recently emerged from a bunker in the desert and you don't know what FNAF is, let me give you some quick context. It's a franchise of horror games that has gotten absurdly popular. They have also gotten a huge amount of hate for various reasons, mainly for being terrible games and because of the toxic fanbase. In fact, even a lot of people who do like the games admit that the fanbase is horrible. After the success of the original game, sequel after sequel has been made faster than the Call of Duty series. The fourth one was going to be the final chapter, something I didn't believe for a second. And guess what was announced a few weeks ago? I am among the people who hate the games. I hate them to my marrow. I cringe every time I hear a word that is frequently associated with them. Do you know what it's like to hate words such as animatronic? I used to love that word, it's an awesome word. It has anima, the Latin word for soul, and also tronic, making it sound all mechanical, and the word just sounds like a machine powered by souls, it's so awesome. But I can no longer appreciate it, because every time someone says it, I immediately think of these games now. Thanks, games! You ruined one of my favorite words for me! Anyway, I have, after a lot of debates with myself, decided to review the games to explain exactly why I hate them. What kind of became the tiebreaker for me was the announcement of this new game, because it made me realize that this guy isn't going to stop. He will continue until someone like me splits his head with an axe. So let's begin the review. But first, I'd like to play a little something dedicated to Mr. Scott Cawthon. There, now let's begin. If you're a fan of FNAF, I ask you to stay and hear me out. If you hate FNAF, sit back and enjoy listening to my criticism. And if you have no strong opinion either way, prepare to have my opinion shoved down your throat! I'm going to review the games in chronological order, and therefore we'll begin with the one that started it all. Let's first talk about the premise of the game. In concept, it's actually really promising. You play as a night guard who is stuck in a building with living, homicidal animatronics. You got to survive until your shift is over in your quest to get a paycheck. Your only weapon is your own two eyes. As long as you're looking at animatronics, they won't move, trying to fool you into thinking that they are not alive. The idea of a horror game where you're stuck with living animatronics that only move when you can't see them is actually pretty good. Animatronics can be pretty creepy, and them not moving when you're looking can both be a good horror effect and game mechanic. Anyway, while the concept is really good, the execution is a series of bad decisions. First off, your character can't move. Instead, you watch over the animatronics with security cameras. People say that this is meant to make you feel disempowered and helpless, and it's important for a horror game to give you that feeling, but this doesn't do that for me. Quite the opposite. If I had to move around in the building to check the rooms, knowing that the animatronics could sneak up behind me at any time, that would be a lot scarier. I would feel more in control and therefore feel more like my character. Not being able to move makes me feel disconnected from my character, and therefore don't worry about his safety. Having to walk around would also make me feel much more exposed than sitting in a cozy office. Another major flaw is that the gameplay itself is boring! You're just sitting on your ass looking at screens. That's not fun, nor is it scary. And another big problem is that there is no evident strategy to beat the game, making this more about pure luck than skill. Sure, you can eventually notice patterns in what you're supposed to do, but the way there is full of trial and error. And that's a problem. You'll probably die a lot in this game, and that sends you back to the beginning again. And since the gameplay isn't enjoyable, this gets tiring very quickly. I've heard that some say that this is what makes the game challenging, but that's not the word to use. The game is not challenging, it's punishing. A challenging game is one that is hard, but losing doesn't come with a penalty so severe that it makes you want to stop playing. A good example of a challenging game is Super Meat Boy. You might die a lot, but you're instantly revived and can spring back into action. The levels aren't very long either, meaning you never lose much progress. You feel like every time you die you come back a little stronger since you're learning how to beat the level. However, a game where you are very likely to lose due to unforgiving gameplay, where you are pushed all the way back to the beginning upon losing, is a punishing game. And the game being punishing is a very bad thing. It will probably cost you a lot of potential fans, and it's simply poor game design. Now for the most infamous part of the gameplay, the jump scares. Whenever you lose, you get a really clumsy jump scare consisting of an animatronic screaming in your face. And this is bad. Jump scares is the laziest, cheapest trick in horror. Using them is basically admitting that you can't scare people. Now, I'm not saying that jump scares have to be a bad thing. Here, let me show you something. This is my horror game class chart, where different aspects of a horror game has been turned into gaming classes. The chart still isn't finished, but it's finished enough to prove my point. So, as you can see, the chart is divided into tank, damage and support. The tanks create the suspense, building up for the damage, which is the scares. And the suspense and the scares are both enhanced by the support class. This empowerment makes you feel vulnerable, and thus the suspense becomes stronger and you feel more helpless when confronted with scares. Blood and gore on the floor and walls make for nice decoration to tell your player that shit's going down, further empowering the suspense. And then we have jump scares. These can enhance the effect of scares. If something scary comes as a surprise and shocks the player, it can make things scarier than they would have been otherwise. So sometimes jump scares are okay to use, but how do you know when they are? Well, here's a test I like to use. Use your scare without a jump scare. Don't have a loud noise and make sure you know exactly when the scare is coming. If it's still at least a little scary, a jump scare is justified. So let's try it. I will now show some jump scares from the game with no sound, and with its timer telling you when it will happen. Was that scary? No, not at all. You see, this is a problem with many horror games these days. These are being used as damage, while damage and sometimes even tanks are pushed aside or at least being used poorly. And that simply doesn't work. So the actual scares in this game are worthless. But I've heard people say that it's not the jump scares that make the game scary, it's the suspense building up to them. And this is how it is for many horror games. The suspense plays a huge role while the scares are the payoffs. But here's the thing, there is no suspense in this game, only boredom. As I said, the gameplay is boring and I feel disconnected from the player. So there is no real suspense, you're just waiting for an inevitable and predictable jump scare. You might say that the suspense part is having to look at the creepy animatronics, but I don't think they look scary. That is of course a matter of opinion, but even if you do find them scary, you can't build a horror game around your monsters' designs. Then the game might as well be a collection of pictures of the monsters. Another problem is that too many things don't make sense about the game itself. For instance, why would having the doors closed drain power? And who would be so pathetic that they actually keep coming back to a job where they will probably die and work for minimum wage? If the game was only one long night and then the player quit the job at once, that would make more sense. But now let's move on to the next game. This game is pretty much the same, with some differences. Firstly, there's a few more animatronics, which doesn't really do anything to improve the game. Really, Lawrence? Yeah, but that's a mechanical anthropomorphic chicken. Why do I even care? Another change is that you now have an animatronic head that you put on when an animatronic approaches to make them ignore you. This mechanic basically replaces the doors, and I guess it also makes a bit more sense, except I don't get why some animatronics attack you while you wear it and some don't, and I couldn't find an explanation to why, so I'm going to see that as a flaw. Another addition is that there's a music box that you frequently have to wind up to prevent a new enemy, that is not an animatronic but a puppet, from getting out of this box and killing you. Yay, a new boring mechanic that does nothing but increase your risk of losing the game. And yes, I know it's to make sure you won't wear the head all the time, but then why do some enemies still attack you? That part still doesn't make sense. Other than that, this game is pretty much the same, so let's move on to the third game. This one I would consider worse than the previous two, and that's pretty bad. Firstly, the main theme of the games is animatronics. This game doesn't technically have any animatronic enemies. Instead, there are ghosts of animatronics as well as a dead guy in a suit. I don't care. What we see in the game is clearly a dead guy in a suit, not a haunted animatronic. Well, this guy isn't, because he behaves exactly like the animatronics. In fact, it's pretty stupid how he follows the same rules as them, even though he should know better than to simply move around aimlessly and freeze whenever a camera is watching him. If he really wants to kill the player, I don't see what's stopping him from just walking straight to the office and beat him to death. This is the problem with the game. Not only are there less enemies, but only one is actually a threat. The others are just reduced to completely pointless jump scares. They don't even kill you, they just scream in your face for shits and giggles. The only enemy that can actually kill you is a guy in a suit, and he's not scary. In fact, even his jump scare is worse than the ones of other enemies. He doesn't even attack you, he just walks up to you.
Hey man, mind if I waddle in here? Just wanna chat a little about life and stuff, you know. So, I'm a dead guy. Wanna know how that happened? Funny story actually.
Otherwise, the game is basically the same as the other two. A few mechanics are gone and the game is trying way too hard to be scarier than the others, but aside from that, there's nothing to mention. Now, before I move on to the fourth game, I'd like to address something that many consider to be the most important part of the game: the story. Why did I wait until now to talk about that? Well, because I wanted to cover it all in one go, and since the story spans over several games, I first had to talk about all 3 games. So why am I doing this before talking about the fourth game? Because it has little to nothing to do with the others. And I'm also not too familiar with the story because I don't care. As far as I know, nothing worth mentioning is in the fourth game story-wise. Anywho, I've heard many fans say that what makes the game good isn't the gameplay, but the story. First of all, that's a flaw in itself. A game with a good story is always a good thing, but regardless of the story's quality, the gameplay must still be enjoyable. How else are you supposed to even want to know the story? But that aside, I will now explain the story that is told to be so complex and amazing. So, a bad man... What? Why? Okay, a purple man kills a bunch of children. The children then come back to life and possess a bunch of animatronics. Then they hunt down the purple man who hides from them in a suit. Will you stop interrupting me? But the hybrid thingy is malfunctioning and he ends up getting crushed inside and reanimates as a part animatronic, part human. What I just explained is the premise for a story, not a story. Yet this is pretty much all there is to it. The story is not interesting, complex or anything. No, this is something the developer threw together to keep the player's interest. That's the same. Some easily made up lore that serves as bait for the players to distract them from the fact that the game actually has very little to offer. Every little thing like the bite of 87 is nothing but a piece of meat dangling from a string right out of the player's reach, held by the developer. So that's what I think of the story. It's just a cheap and lazy trick to make sure players keep coming back, something that Scott makes up as he goes. It could be interesting if you expanded on it, adding details and stuff. For instance, why did the purple man kill the children? What were his motivations? And how and why did the children possess the animatronics? And why did the purple man become Springtrap instead of simply dying? And you also need a better way of telling your story than through arcade-style minigames and that ridiculously hard puzzle in the third game with a disappointing payoff. I mean, it feels like the games are for some reason trying to make you feel sorry for the animatronics, and how are you supposed to do that when you know nothing about them and never see them in any situation that might evoke emotion? Now let's move on to the fourth game. This game is quite different from the others. But is it so in a good way? Let's take a look. The first change you'll notice is that you can finally move freely. If by move freely you mean faceplant your way in fixed directions. Seriously, is it's so very hard to make the player move like in so many other games. It would make such a big change for the better, yet dear Mr. Scott seems incapable of doing it. In fact, I like this tune system even less than the cameras. With the cameras, there was a reason why you could only see the area from a few different angles, because you're viewing it from fixed cameras. However, this new walking function is basically the same as the cameras with the difference that there is a little transition. It simply feels clumsy, unnatural and unfinished. If you can't make a character move properly, don't make it move at all. Another change is the enemies. They no longer resemble animatronics, they simply look like mechanical monsters. What makes animatronics creepy is that they are built to look appealing, yet they still look off in some way. They take advantage of the uncanny valley, something I'm assuming that just about everyone watching this are at least slightly familiar with. But these things are not in the uncanny valley. You'll never see anyone build something like this with the intention to make them look appealing to children. Instead of looking creepy, they just look overworked and over the top. Because of this, it's safe to assume that they aren't supposed to be scary in the same way as animatronics, but a more basic kind of scary. I still just think they look stupid, but that is again a matter of opinion. The gameplay has changed as well. Instead of trying to keep an eye on each enemy, you ward them off with a flashlight. I'll admit that this is a big improvement. It makes more sense that a monster would shy away from the light and decide to not move when a camera is looking at them. It also feels like you're doing something, since switching between screens feels really pointless. It's easier to figure out what to do, and there's also a sense of urgency. But there's still a logical problem, the same problem as in the third game. Why are the enemies just screwing around? In the first two games, there was a reason why the animatronics wouldn't wander around and not just rush straight for the player. They simply aren't looking for him. It's just that if they see him, they attack him. Springtrap doesn't have that excuse because he is a human and therefore has a human mind. If he wants to kill the player, he should just hunt him down at once. And even if we assume that he for some reason has the mind of an animatronic and therefore works the same as all previous enemies, that excuse doesn't work for the monsters in this game. It's very clear that all they want is to kill the player. So why don't they? There's many of them and their target is stuck in a house. How hard can it be to surround a child and eat him before he can shine his flashlight on all of them? Even the ghosts in Pac-Man know more about cornering than these things. Another issue is that the game is almost doing a thing right, but doesn't. And that thing is concealing. It's on the horror game class chart. Very important class. See, in horror you should almost always hide your monster. Show it in darkness, show small parts of it while leaving most of it off screen, show a silhouette of it. As long as the player can't see the monster properly, you're doing it right. Then you might show the monster at some point in the game, but make sure to leave it hidden for most of the time. The reason you should do this is because what scares each of us the most is our own mind. And if the players can only see small parts of the monster, like their body shape or a small part of it, or if they can't see it at all but only hear it, their imagination will fill in the rest. If I see this, my mind will be able to create a mental image designed specifically to scare me. Something that's way scarier to me than this. This game is halfway there with the concealing. Throughout most of the game you don't see the monsters, only hear them. But here's the problem, you do see them. Clearly. And not just in the scares where you are supposed to see them, but in the gameplay as well. You see them moving away or simply looking right at you. I suppose this is meant to enhance the horror, but it doesn't. I can see enough of the monsters to know that they aren't scary to me. If I could only see shadows and tiny glimpses, it would be so much scarier. But the way it is, it feels more like the monsters are going, "Oh shit, he sees me! I gotta get out of here! Gosh, I suck at killing children." And of course, the game is still just a bunch of jump scares. The tension is ruined by the clumsy movement, the boring gameplay and the monsters sliding out of sight. The gameplay has improved a little in some ways, but for every step forwards it takes two backwards. So this game is in some ways the worst and in some ways the best. But no matter what, it's still a terrible horror game. Why? Well, a game can't really help that it has a crappy community. Let's look at Minecraft. Great game, but a lot of the players are really annoying. I only take the community into account when judging a game in case the game is solely multiplayer, since the community then becomes a vital part of the gameplay. Alright then. Well, yes, the fanbase is a really toxic one. I've seen a lot of FNAF fans that seem to be terrible people. But I've also seen friendly fans and some genuinely good fan content. Some songs, animated versions of those songs, and even some fan art. No, I was in fact exclusively referring to the Don Bluth style fan art from that one person. Don Bluth is awesome. Some YouTubers are like me, some fan videos. Despite my hatred for the games, I still watch the videos out of courtesy. Yep. I like both animating and reviewing. Why can't I do both? Magic! So as I was going to say before we got off track, I don't think FNAF is any better or worse because of its fanbase. If FNAF didn't exist, the bad fans would find somewhere else to be bad fans, and the fans making good fan content would be making good fan content about something else. I will, however, show this clip, just for fun. I've been wanting to make that comparison for so long. Okay, so now I've given many reasons why I hate the games, but they still aren't enough to make me hate them as much as I do. No, there is one final reason, the big one, the one that is born when you put all of the others in a pile. You're supposed to ask what it is so I can answer dramatically. Is the impact it has on horror as a whole. Horror is a dying genre, both in terms of movies and games, and horror is very close to my heart, so that really saddens me. We live in a time where you can make a movie with nothing but gore and call it a horror movie, where you can make an action game with monsters and call it a horror game. However, there are still some people that haven't forgotten what horror truly is, what it once was. People who are trying to bring it back with new, innovative ideas. And then comes a guy named Scott Cawthon and gives us a bunch of games that are just about everything that people are doing wrong when making horror today. Games that have gotten really popular and thus has an impact on how people view horror games and make horror games. These games are telling developers that it's okay to make horror with little to no effort or thought. You don't need to try hard to make profit. And the players are learning that this is what horror should be like, this is what they're supposed to enjoy. Naturally, there are even worse horror games, but none so popular. None that has been such a big influence. How many games have you seen that are either inspired by FNAF or simply based on it? Personally, I've seen thousands, literally thousands. And how many promising horror games do you think never got the popularity they deserved because people were too busy playing FNAF? Games that could have helped reviving horror that instead died with it. Thinking about how big of an influence these games have been, how they have rewritten the way many think of horror, how much of a setback this is for the revival of horror. This is why I hate the game so much. I don't care if Scott knows about the damage he's doing or if he's under the impression that he's a force of good, because he clearly has no idea what horror is truly about. Horror isn't about monsters going boo, it's not about children getting killed, it's not about any of the stuff seen in this game or most horror games today. It's about delving into the depths of the mind and dig up the darkest aspects of ourselves. The things we fear, the things we are ashamed of, the things we would rather ignore for the sake of our own sanity. The things that despite their unpleasant nature intrigues us, makes us want to move on when we know we should turn back. It's about creating something that will not only make people flinch and laugh it off, but think about for days. Something that will haunt their dreams and make them look back at the memories of experiencing it and feel the same terror as they felt when they were first exposed to it. It's about bringing up taboos that we don't want to discuss, subjects we would otherwise frown upon and reject, and force us to follow the game in its analysis of the subject, feeding us thought-provoking ideas and concepts that might change the way we look at the subject. It's about exploring the human psyche as well as the psyche of the player, showing the realities we wish to unsee about the world, the mind and ourselves. A great horror game will not only leave you scared, but leave you questioning yourself, your actions in the game as well as your actions in real life, and even yourself as a whole. Make you think differently about who you really are. A good horror game gets into your head, an even better horror game gets into your head and makes changes. That is what I believe horror is truly about. What many have forgotten, but some young, fresh minds with new and imaginative concepts are trying to remind us of. What this very franchise is trying to make us forget about with the huge influence it has had. The revival of horror will come, this I am sure of. But if we want to speed up its arrival, we must make sure to give good horror games the recognition they deserve and let games like this die and be forgotten. The same goes for horror movies, which is a media that this franchise also plans to infect. If these games just had 15 minutes of fame before everyone realized how bad they are and forgot about them, I wouldn't hate them more than I hate other bad horror games that are acknowledged by just about everyone as bad horror games. But that's not the case. They are causing damage to horror itself, and as someone who loves horror, that angers me to the point that I might combust! So, thank you for staying with me for this long. If you agree with me, please let me know in the comments so I can give you my love. If you disagree with me and you have arguments that I didn't bring up in this video, leave a comment as well and we can have a friendly discussion. And with that, I'm off to add the final touch to the grand finale of Willcraft-tober.